Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started, and I think others will join us as we go. I've gotten quite a few phone calls about this. My name is Heather Richards. I'm the planning director for the city of McMinnville. And first of all, I want to say thank you for joining us. I recognize that our postcard that went out to everyone had some logistical challenges with it. It was smaller than I thought it would be. And also, there's a difference between how millennials think and how someone my age thinks. And so they had put a bit.ly reference on the postcard, and many people didn't understand what that was, which is sort of the, it's the link to all the on the internet links for information and how to get into these sessions. So I apologize, and I'm glad that people were able to find their way here. Okay, so I'm going to share a presentation with you. It's kind of long, and it has a lot of information in it, and that's because there's been lots of different questions we're getting. But what I want to do, the purpose of this hour that we're going to spend together, is that you get the information that you need about the 3 Mile Lane area plan, your questions answered, and then also information about how you can be part of the discussion. So right now, this is an active dialogue at the city council. They have some decisions in front of them relative to this plan, and they want to hear from you. And so we're trying to get the word out as much as possible so that people can talk to counselors. Either you can talk to them either privately. This is what we call a community visioning effort. But you can talk to your city councilors individually if you want to, if you're more comfortable that way. Or you can talk to them in the public hearing process, or you can send in emails and letters as well. And that information gets to all the city councilors. So we want to make sure you have all that. But I'm going to share my screen right now with you. Hopefully you're seeing a slide and not the phases of the moon, which I'm seeing on my screen. So anyways, we do want to talk about the 3 Mile Lane area plan discussion that's underway, give you the basic information about it, and then highlight some of the more active discussions. There has been some controversy in this dialogue, so we want to highlight that for you. But to start with, the area plan that we're talking about is the area highlighted in red on this map. It's in the southeastern corner of McMinnville. If you want to think of it, it's all the land that's north and south of Highway 18 as you're coming in from the east, all the way to the Yamhill River Bridge, which is the bridge that's currently under construction. All that's about 1,300 acres of land, so it's a pretty big area. And all of that is currently in the city right now. There's been some confusion. So there's a lot of vacant land out there, but it's all in the city limits and it's all zoned for development. So it's not a question of, if it's going to be developed. We've had a lot of people comment, we don't want that to come into the city. We'd like it to remain farmland. It is in the city and it's intended to be developed and has been in the city for 40 years now. So it's not a matter of if it will develop, it's a matter of how it will develop. It's a matter of how it will develop to serve McMinnville's current and future needs. So we asked ourselves, how does this land best serve McMinnville moving into the future? And our planning horizon is 2021 to 2041. By the state regulatory system, we do planning for a 20-year horizon. And then we asked ourselves, does our current comprehensive plan support the vision for this process, this area? And if it doesn't, what do we need to change to support that vision? And then how does that vision impact our state and local transportation system? So this is a community visioning process. So it's coming from the community and from volunteers in terms of what should be the vision for this site, these 1,300 acres of property, in terms of how it serves McMinnville now and into the future. And just to give you some perspective, by 2041, we have been told by the state that we should be planning for about 45,000 people as our population base. And we are currently a little less than 35,000 right now. So there is a lot of vacant land in this study area, which is interesting because we don't have a lot of vacant land in McMinnville as a whole. Most of it actually is in this study area. So everything on this map that's in gray is vacant land. So there was another reason why we looked at this is there's a lot of opportunity for development here in the future as we struggle with land supply. And so that's why we said, let's get in front of this, find out what the community wants to see happen here, and then develop the planning program to support that. What is an area plan has been a question often asked. An area plan is really a high level planning effort. You know, we often talk about things at the 30,000 foot level and then the 15,000 foot level and the 5,000 foot level. Think of this as the 30,000 foot level effort. It's really a larger exercise of drawing circles on a map to create a community vision, and then we'll continue to refine it as we go into the next planning processes. It is developed by community members. That's really important because it's what the community wants to see happen here. And then we use this area plan to then provide guidance to us when we're updating the public utility plans, so water, wastewater, streets, or the parks and open space plans, or our comprehensive plan map and zone map so that we can support the vision. So it was literally drawn by members, community members in charrettes. We would sit down with people around tables, put the maps in front of them, give them markers and say, what do you see happening in this area? What would you like to see happen based on what's there now and what the opportunities are? The final plan is actually a plan with 5 appendices. The appendices all have the data that informs the plan. And the data that we did, we hired consultants to bring in some analysis. We did a transportation analysis. We did a market analysis. We did an economic development analysis. And then we brought in an urban designer so we could talk about design and development standards that made the most sense for McMinnville. This was all funded by a grant from the state, from ODOT actually, of about $275,000. And this has been a 4-year planning effort. The plan itself is only 50 pages. It's pretty short in terms of plans and easy to read. So if you are interested and like to read plan documents, I encourage you to do that. And it was developed by community volunteers. So we had a project advisory committee work for 3 years on this. And then we had a consultant team helping them. And then we had technical staff helping them from both the city and from ODOT. ODOT is the Oregon Department of Transportation. There's 5 goals to this plan. One is focused on economic development. One is focused on, making sure all the different land uses in that area are cohesive and interact with each other in a good way. Another goal is transportation, make sure we're maintaining the functionality of Highway 18 as an expressway, and then also looking at the local transportation system. Another goal was aesthetics and design. This is a very highly visible entry point for McMinnville. Probably more people interact with McMinnville passing through on Highway 18 than any other corridor that we have. And so we want to make sure that whatever happens out here is reflecting what's unique about McMinnville and really showcases it rather than doing generic development. And then there's a lot of residential neighborhoods that are starting to emerge in this area. And we wanted to make sure that we were focusing on residential quality of life. None of these goals are more important than any other. So they're labeled 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but they're all considered equal goals. So what came out of this process is what we call land use vision. And this is the map for that land use vision. And I'll walk you through it. But it's really looking at how to serve some of McMinnville's future needs. Not all of it, because this is only a section of our community, but it's a section where there's a lot of vacant land. So affordable housing is obviously one of our future needs. So there's a lot of identified high density housing in this plan. Most of it is to the west side of the study area. That's very deliberate because we don't want to have a housing adjacent to our airport. And the recommendation is mostly high density housing. However, we are also recommending that those high density neighborhoods have what we call mixed use commercial products too. meaning that there's coffee shops and opportunities for other type of neighborhoods serving commercial amenities so that people can walk to get things that they need in their neighborhood. Because this area is also fairly cut off from the rest of the city. The access point right now is Yamhill River Bridge to get to the downtown. And historically, that's been, somewhat off-putting to walk or bike across that bridge. We're hoping that improves with the new bridge construction, though. So this is some pictures of what the high-density housing product could look like out there. It doesn't mean all of it will be affordable. In fact, a lot of housing in McMinnville, unless it's deed restricted, just as a market commodity. So people often will ask me, how come you can't make this affordable and force the developer to sell it for X? We can't force a developer to sell their product for anything. That's all determined by the market. However, if we're subsidizing housing, we can then say we'll participate financially, but you'll have to put it on the market at this rate. And that's what we call deed restricted housing. And so there is some of that in this area planned as well, but most of it will be market housing. The premise, though, is if you have more units on property, that will help offset the cost of development, and we can bring the costs down. So that's the intention here. Several different types of development forms. Up here in the upper right-hand corner is sort of that mixed-use form where you have residential development above commercial. And that's intended to be on the frontage roads, Cumulus and Stratus. Then we also were looking at the need for more good jobs in McMinnville. McMinnville has a lower household median income than the county and the state. So we have some lower income households as a median, and we're trying to raise wages here. And so we talked a lot about how do we bring good jobs to the community, either by growing them locally, and that's how we best develop new jobs in McMinnville is supporting our local businesses and helping them grow, or recruiting new businesses. So we have an economic development campus planned. It's called the Innovation Center, and it's right here on the southern side. This is mostly on the property that you see at the intersection of what we call Cumulus and Highway 18. That's this intersection right here. It's the intersection where if you were turning to go to the museums and you're turning left, if you're traveling eastbound to go to the museums, you would be turning right to go to this center. Right now, there's a grain silo there and then farmland right behind it. It's 200 acres of vacant land there. So the thought is that we make that an industrial campus. So the emerging need in the economic world is that businesses are looking to locate in places where there is a culture of support for their employees in terms of the amenities nearby. So campus with trails and things like that. And so that's the intention behind this, is that it would be an industrial campus with Class A office space for research and development, for industrial manufacturing, for smaller industrial businesses and larger ones. And then we'd also bring education into this campus, and all those resources would be together. We'd have trails connecting into Airport Park, and then that's this big green park that's just to the right of it. And then the adjacency to the airport helps with the location of corporate headquarters. So I often tell people a quick little story. This Innovation Campus idea started about 4 years ago. And the reason for that is we had two businesses at the same time that were located downtown, that were locally grown businesses. Their corporate headquarters were downtown, and they had outgrown their downtown buildings, and which is good. So they're a growing business and they had great jobs, but they had outgrown their downtown locations and they couldn't find anywhere else to locate. So if you think about it, I'm a business with office needs, and where am I going to find large office space in McMinnville? So we were on the verge of losing them. If people can mute themselves as they come in, that'd be helpful. Yeah. We were on the verge of losing these two businesses. And so, excuse me, I'm going to mute this person, I think. Yeah. Losing these two businesses to other communities, they came to us and said they couldn't find any space. At the same time, the buildings that Del Smith built as part of the Evergreen campus on the south side of Highway 18 were coming out of bankruptcy. And previously, they had been thought of as industrial development buildings for manufacturing, but they're really built as office space. And so we located those two businesses there. They're growing and healthy there. And we started talking about there's an opportunity to do more of that. And so that's where this innovation center concept came from. For that, here are some pictures as to what that would look like for the innovation center campus. Then in front of the Innovation Center campus is a retail center that's been identified. This is to offer more commercial options for McMinnville over the next 20 years as we grow. The intention behind this is that it's a mixed-use town center, so not a sort of big box retail development place, but really an intentional mixed-use development with some anchor retailers, with shops and restaurants, with entertainment, with office space, with lodging adjacent to the airport, and then some parks and open space in there as well. And there's a lot of dialogue in the plan about this needs to be built in such a way that it reflects McMinnville's unique charm. And we'll go through what that looks like. This is placed here for a couple of reasons. One, the intersection off of Highway 18 at Cumulus can handle the traffic that would be associated with it. And then two, to be able to develop the industrial land behind it, again, that 200-acre site, there is very expensive transportation improvements that need to happen to protect the highway, and industrial development can't handle those costs. So we've had lots of people look at those 200 acres and walk away from it because it's too expensive to develop. But the commercial development can carry those costs. And so the hope is that the commercial development would build the infrastructure, and then that would then allow the industrial development to happen behind it. The reason commercial development can carry the costs is because the lease rates for commercial development, so if I'm the developer and I'm leasing to a tenant, the lease rates for commercial is about 3 to 4 times higher than industrial lease rates. So they have a higher profit margin and a larger pro forma where they can put those infrastructure costs in there. And this is what that mixed-use town center is meant to look like in terms of the design and development standards, with varying heights of density, with office space above the retail and some walkable areas and gathering spaces. And here's another example. And then the project advisory committee put together a design booklet based on this space as to how they want to see this space reflect McMinnville-ness. That's what they called it, reflect what's unique about McMinnville. We also looked at a healthcare campus. So the hospital is located here. There's vacant land around the hospital. The hospital industry is meant to be one of the ones that expands the most in the next 20 years as baby boomers age. And so we wanted to ensure that we were planning for that ability to expand the campus around the hospital. This doesn't mean the hospital is going to expand, but there's a lot of secondary medical offices that typically will build around the hospital as the hospital is going to less inpatient programs and more outpatient programs. So we felt this was a great place for that to occur in McMinnville. And then there's 2 great parks in this study area. So there's Joe Dancer Park on the west side, and then the airport park on the east side. But yet there's not a lot of connectivity for all the different developments in this area to those 2 parks. They're really cut off. So we looked at trail systems to start connecting the residences and the business places with these 2 parks. So on the map, when you see the dotted line, those are trails. They're not exact, they're just concepts. We understand we'll have to do some engineering to understand exactly where they can go. When we first came out with this map, we had a couple of residents up here, up in this northern area. I don't know if you can see my cursor, but it's a housing area up by the Yamhill River on the north side. And there's a deep ravine there. And they came back and said, we don't think you're going to be able to get a trail through there. You might want to look a little bit further south. And then lastly, tourism is a growing business in McMinnville. We have 2 tourism properties out on Highway 18, one with a very large presence, which is the Evergreen campus with the space museums and the water park. and then a vacant property that's zoned tourist commercial that's just south of the RV park. And so we want to support that and promote that and keep that in the tourist commercial position. So that was the land use vision. And then what we said was, how will the transportation system be impacted by this vision? And went through that planning process. So the transportation plan outlined in this document maintains Highway 18 as a state expressway and freight route, so the bypass. There's actually no bypass classification at the state level. That's what we call it. It's classified as a state expressway and freight route, and they have standards for how those operate, and this plan maintains those standards. And so that's the Oregon Highway Plan standards. It also follows that original bypass plan put together in 1996 for the Highway 18 corridor in McMinnville. So any new additions to the transportation system on Highway 18, and there's one, and I'll talk you through that, comes out of that actual 1996 plan. It optimizes the two signal intersections that exist today. So you have one at Norton Avenue, which is where the hospital is to the south and McDonald's is to the north. And then you have that one at Cumulus, which is where you have the grain silo to the south and the museums to the north. Those exist today. And then there's a planned intersection improvement at Cirrus Avenue. So that's the intersection that comes out of the airport. And the intention there is you have lots of local roads on this east side of Highway 18. Local access points create conflict on a highway, people trying to get on the highway in an uncontrolled manner. And so the hope is to close those local roads, build frontage roads that people can use to get to these controlled intersections, and put a new controlled intersection at Cirrus Avenue. The recommendation is that it's either a signal or a roundabout. And that would be determined by ODOT. ODOT has a mobility services group that reviews all improvements. On that group is freight representatives. And so they're really looking at what's the best improvement from a perspective of moving freight from A to B. And so that will go through that process. The big piece of the plan is finishing building out those frontage roads. That's what protects the highway. That's where local traffic should be traveling. So today we have a frontage road on Cumulus, which is just north of the highway system. So if you can get it on it at the bridge and you go to Physicians Medical Center or Virginia Garcia, you're traveling on that frontage road. And we want to have those frontage roads going all the way on both the north and south side of Highway 18. And there's been rumors that we've removed the planned overpass. That hasn't been removed. It just isn't necessary or warranted by the growth patterns right now. So we will continue to plan for it. And but at this point in time, we don't have the need for it. And if we don't have the need for it, we can't tell development that they have to build it. So unless we want to build it ourselves with our own funds, it won't be built until it's needed. And they're about $80 million overpasses. So how is the plan developed? It was a public process. So it is a plan that's recommended through a public process with a project advisory committee that had community volunteers on it, and they devoted hundreds of hours to their work time, meeting, reviewing what the consultants were providing them, and then doing a lot of public outreach. They had 2 open houses, they had a town hall, they did online surveys, and they did charrettes to collect information from the general public. And then they reviewed that, and through that process developed this plan. The plan was provided to the Planning Commission, and they went through a couple of public hearings, and then they voted to recommend it to City Council for adoption. And now City Council is reviewing it, and it's had 2 public hearings, and it's having a 3rd one next Tuesday night. This all started in 2017 with, we brought in a University of Oregon graduate program to work with us for the summer on, the first steps for this plan, which was, what do people want to see happen there? And we started doing these design charrettes like you see here, which had great turnout and participation. And people spent the day together and drew all these maps and presented them to each other. We also did that classics circle sticker process where people voted on their priorities. And now that the top priority was to develop new commercial spaces along 3 Mile Lane, gas stations, grocery, and retail. And then the second priority was to provide services and amenities on the east side of the bridge, as well as office space for higher wage jobs and traded sector jobs. So that's where you see the recommendation for the retail center and the innovation center coming from. We then got the grant from the state and put together a project advisory committee. This is who was on the project advisory committee, and they worked for 3 years on this. They did their own design charrettes to refine some of the ideas, continued to draw on maps, and then did the outreach as I described. This is the town hall where we also had a charrette, but we had good participation there as well. This was held out at Shemetica. We tried to hold most of our public engagement in the area. So then we did research that informed the plan. We had a market analysis that we did to try and understand, what will the market respond to over the next 20 years. The first thing that came out of it was, which is intuitive, I think, to most McMinnville residents, is that we need more housing. And especially apartments. And so from that process, we then developed the high density housing recommendation. This is the one that surprised everyone. We looked at retail spending in McMinnville and outside of McMinnville. When you look at it outside of McMinnville, you're talking about leakage. So the amount of money people are spending somewhere else that live in McMinnville. And we've discovered that we have about $200 million annually in retail leakage. We have $95 million annually in general merchandise right here. And then we have $30 million in leakage in food and drinking places, so restaurants, and then clothing and accessories. So that shows that many people are leaving McMinnville to seek out those items. And there was a discussion of, should we be providing that here locally in McMinnville, so that we can reduce the vehicular trips to other communities and keep that money here. We also learned the office market was a good market to respond to, and then tourism was growing and continues to grow. So based on that, the consultant came back and said, this should really be your program that you're looking at for this area, and that's what informs the land use vision that I just walked you through. And this is that map again. So the next step was, does our current planning program support that vision that came out of this work? And so in planning, the first step is what we call the comprehensive plan map. The comprehensive plan map has 3 designations: industrial, retail, commercial, and residential. So on here, yellow's residential, red is commercial, and blue is industrial. And then that says what can be developed on those lands. And then we have several different zones that a developer can say, I have an industrial designation, I'd like it to be this industrial zone. So based on that work, we identified 3 areas that needed comp plan map changes to support this program. 2 areas are over on the east side, they're labeled 1 and 2, and that's where you see that high density mixed use neighborhood with the commercial amenities on the ground floor. And then the third one is that larger retail site. It totals about 79 acres out of the 1,340 acres in the area. And of that, about 49 acres are what we call developable. So in the grand scheme of the study area, not a lot of change. And that's important because I'll walk you through how it impacts Highway 18. So the Highway 18 discussion, here's what we know. We know that Highway 18 is going to get more congested in the future. It will. It has capacity to get more congested. It's built for that. So that will happen. The question is, how much more traffic will this plan cause on Highway 18 in terms of this recommendation? And then how does that affect the functionality of it? So when we talk about highways and functionality, we talk about it from a perspective of mobility. So how can people move through somewhere on a highway in such a way that, one, it's timely and they can rely on it. So that is access. So the less access points you have on the road, the more mobility you have. And that's what this diagram is meant to show you. And highways and expressways are towards the end in terms of having limited access and more mobility. The only classification higher than that is freeways, and that's I-5 and I-84 in the state. We also then measure it. We measure it to see how are we doing. This is mobility, at the level it needs to be. And the measurement is determined by the state. They adopt state law that says what these measurements should be. We talk about that from a perspective of VC ratio. So I'll go back to this, which is the volume to capacity ratio at the intersection. So how many cars are going through the intersection at a time? And it's a percentage of 100%. So all these numbers on the right-hand side is a percentage of 100%. In the Oregon Highway Plan, what we call the level of service C, which is up to 80% capacity, is the threshold. So we want to ensure that the highway system is working at a maximum capacity of 80%. And that's what's determined by state law. So then we did the analysis. In 2018, we went out and counted cars on the highway to figure out where we're at right now. And in that analysis, we're at 62% capacity at the intersection of Norton Lanes. That's where the hospital and McDonald's are. And we're at 56% capacity at Cumulus Avenue. So they're doing well there. And then we said, okay, if we build out this area as the existing comp plan allows, so without adopting the 3-mile lane area plan, we build out this area in the next 20 years, what will that look like? And based on that, the Norton Lane intersection goes up to 74% capacity, and the Cumulus Avenue intersection goes up to 63% capacity. So that's going to happen no matter what, whether the city adopts the 3-mile lane area plan. And we do it based on peak hours. So we're doing it based on the 30th busiest hour of the year. This is basically how we describe that. The reason why they go up like that is because you're adding, the brown is what you're adding in terms of new trips on the road from build out of the vacant land that's in the area. So right there. Then we asked the question, okay, if we change the comp plan to support the vision and it develops the way the vision says it's going to develop, how does that impact Highway 18 and the traffic? And that impacted it by raising the Norton Lane intersection from 0.74 to 0.76, and the Cumulus Avenue intersection from 0.63 to 0.64. So it's not moving the needle very much at all. And the reason for, and people struggle with that, but the reason for that is in the grand scheme of things, it's not a lot of land change that's occurring in the study area. It feels like it's big, but this area is really big. And this shows that differential. So the orange line here is what is the impact to those two intersections based on this plan being adopted. And then this shows what the changes are relative to housing and relative to employment. So most of the change will occur in the employment side of things, and it will be based on mostly what's already in the plan, and then a little bit added to that because the plan does increase jobs in the area. Then there's been questions of this is a forecast for 20 years. How do you make sure you're protecting the system? So there's many different decision-making points and review that occurs before development actually is built. So right now we're at that big picture level, which we call the comprehensive plan level. Then if a developer wants to build something, they need to zone their property to the proper zone. And so that's more refined. So let's say I have a commercial comprehensive plan designation on my property. I can then choose 3 zones, commercial zones to rezone it into. Each of those zones have a table of different land uses that are allowed. And so when they come in for a rezone, we look at all those allowed uses in the zone and we say, okay, you need to do a traffic impact analysis to the highest use, that the use that's going to impact it the most. And let's see how that impacts the traffic system. And then when they come in with a development plan, so I've now chosen my zone, and now I'm going to say, this is what I'm building. We then ask for another traffic impact analysis to review what that specific plan will do to the highway system. So each step along the way, we're doing the analysis. And if anything triggers the highway system to not perform at the level that it's adopted to perform at, so that 80% of capacity, then that developer needs to do one of two things, or three things. They don't develop, that's their choice, or they pay for the improvements needed to bring that performance on the intersection back to the 80%. And the improvements could be build those frontage roads to take local traffic off the highway so it's not going through the intersection. Or they say, we want to build just to the point where we're maintaining the 80%. And we say, okay, you can do that, but your building has to be limited to this much. So you scale your development down. There's been a lot of talk about how does this impact the bypass plan for Highway 18, which was put together in 1996. This is a copy of that plan. The end of the plan is that we have a big overpass at that intersection of Cumulus, so where the museums are, and that grain silo. And we shut down the intersection at Norton Avenue, so no longer will there be a signal at Norton, nor can you turn left to go to McDonald's or right to go to the hospital. All that will be shut down, and everybody will use the overpass to get where they need to go by going on the overpass and going on those frontage roads. The Cirrus Avenue improvement goes away as well when this overpass is built. And that's the end game for all of this. This is a very expensive build out. This equates to a couple $100 million worth of improvements to get here. And we don't need it yet in terms of the growth patterns in this area. And so that's why there's not a recommendation to build the overpass right now and shut down this intersection at Norton. The bypass plan has 3 phases in it. We're in phase 1 today in terms of existing signal here and a signal at Cumulus. With the plan adoption, we feel like we'll be between phase 1 and phase 2 as we move towards this concept of the overpass. The reason why we're not in phase 3 with the need for the overpass is when the plan was put together, it was expected that McMinnville would grow a lot more than it actually has, and that it will grow a lot more than it actually has in this particular area. So everything that's colored on this map was intended to be in the city limits and developed. And right now, everything, what's inside the red line, that's our current city limits and urban growth boundary. So we haven't grown as much as expected. There isn't as much development in this area as originally anticipated. And so until all that development occurs, we don't need all those improvements yet. So let's talk about the commercial rezone. That's the most controversial aspect of this plan right now. It's emerged as the most controversial during the public hearing process. The recommendation is for 40 to 60 acres of commercial rezone for this retail center, mixed use town center. And that's based on 33 net acres being built. So we want to take out a lot of land out of this site to plan for that future overpass. So we don't want the developer building on that land, because then when we do go to build the overpass, we'll have to buy the land back with the improvements on it, and it'll be cheaper to buy if it's bare land than if it has, stores on it. So the property owners have agreed to that. And then we also have all the frontage roads that we need to build in that area. The reason it's controversial, there's some who want to allow for the opportunity for a commercial retailer in McMinnville like Costco or Target. And this would be where they would locate if we wanted to have those types of commercial amenities here in town. That's not to say that the property owner has leases with those two types of retail options, or that, some people say Costco owns the land. None of that is true. But if they were going to locate in McMinnville, right now, this is the only place they could locate that has developable land and the transportation support that we can see. And Costco has been looking to locate in McMinnville. Then there are some who do not want any big box retail in McMinnville at all. And they would like to see all the future retail on the site limited in size to prevent it from coming in. Then there are some who aren't as concerned about the size, but what they want to see is limitation on the uses. So they'd like it to be limited to just a grocery store, and a gas station and some smaller retail services that would serve the residential neighborhoods in this area. And keep in mind, we already have neighborhood serving commercial planned in those residential neighborhoods. Then there are some who want it all to remain industrial and only allow sort of secondary retail to support that campus. So a couple of restaurants and a coffee shop, something like that. And then there are some who don't want any retail at all, no new retail in McMinnville. And then there are some that say, you know, the industrial development will never happen if you don't have commercial development here, and we need the industrial development to happen for jobs, unless we're going to publicly subsidize the industrial development, meaning that the city or the state pays for the infrastructure improvements. So those are all the different opinions for this commercial rezone that the city council is hearing and we're trying to work through right now. The recommendation from the project advisory committee was this mixed use town center, trying to pull all those types of different opinions together. So they're recommending a couple of anchor stores that are on a grid pattern that create this sort of pedestrian walkable areas, not these large parking lots, with smaller stores mixed in there as well. They recommended that for a variety of reasons. One, they heard in the public process that they went through that people do want more commercial options in McMinnville. People were asking, you know, why do I need to drive to Salem to shop at Costco? Or why do I need to go to Sherwood to shop at Target or whatever it was? People were saying we need more here. And then they also saw the data that showed that people are spending a lot of money outside of McMinnville at other communities buying things that they can't find here. It's been asked how much of that data, that 205 million, was online shopping, and we just found out those numbers yesterday. When we did the market analysis in 2019, we expected that 11% of that $205 million was online. That online shopping went up to about 15, 16% during COVID, but it's now coming back down again because people now want to go back to the stores. So we expect the online shopping of our retail leakage to be somewhere around 12 to 13%. We also have a mandate from the state to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So making deliberate value choices to send people to other communities to buy provisions increases greenhouse gas emissions. There's also a food desert in this area. There's a lot of households here and no grocery store. And so there was the intention that the grocery store was needed. And then there was that whole discussion of how do we get that industrial land developed, bring more jobs to our community, and who's going to pay for the infrastructure improvements to make that happen. And so if we want the private side to pay for it, the retail center was the tool for that. So this shows some of the commercial interest from the community. I'm going to go through this fairly quickly. We got out with boards and asked people just to write down what they wanted to see in McMinnville in the future. The public testimony concerns that City Council is hearing is that, one, they are hearing from the public that McMinnville needs more retail choices. We've had people testify about how they can't find what they need in McMinnville and they're driving out of town to shop. Then we've had other people testify that McMinnville has enough retail right now and for a future population of 45,000, and you can find everything you need in McMinnville. You should be able to go to Walmart and find everything you need. The people who are testifying saying we need more retail choices are saying, I shouldn't be told that I just find everything at Walmart. I should have choices. That's kind of the dialogue that's going back and forth. There's other people who say big box retail and large format retail is not appropriate for McMinnville. We don't want it here. We want to limit the size of retailers in the future. It will have an impact on downtown and it will, and Highway 99. And right now we don't have a size limitation in McMinnville, just so everyone knows. Lowe's, which is our largest retailer, is 170,000 square feet. There's also people testifying that if you give up industrial land, you're giving up high-paying jobs. We do have a study that shows that's not entirely true, but that there is that premise that's being positioned in public testimony. And then we're also hearing that additional retail will lead to congestion on Highway 18. So those are the concerns that City Council's hearing. These are some of the design elements that are in the plan. So the Project Advisory Committee was really intentional about how things would develop in this area. And one of their larger recommendations in the plan is that the city needs to adopt design and development standards for this area that says, you developer, if you're building, this is what we want it to look like and feel like. So they are asking for these grid patterns, which gets rid of that really big massing that you see in some places with the large parking lots. And they're asking for it to be regionally inspired architecture. So playing off this historic grain silo. If you don't know, the Jackson Family Wine building, actually, we asked them to play off that grain silo, and their roof line mirrors the grain silo itself. The plan has a bunch of implementation recommendations in it about those design and development standards and how to move them forward. And then there's this design booklet that was also developed. We've had 4 public hearings on this thus far. We've worked through the transportation issues. We've brought in the transportation experts. And so really, I think what we're down to right now is it's a policy decision for City Council in terms of the most controversial site, which is the commercial site, because it does meet state standards for transportation. It meets all the state rules, and so now the City Council just needs to decide if it's the right thing for McMinnville moving forward or not. So we want to get out and ask people what they think. The City Council's hearing a lot of testimony, but Friends of Yamhill County has been very engaged in this discussion, and they want to broaden it and find out what people think. So we sent out that mailer to the whole city, to all addresses in the city, to tell them what's going on and give people the opportunity to get involved if they want to. We're telling people, talk with your neighbors. We know there's lots of conversations taking place about this. Communicate to City Council. They need to hear from you. They have a big decision in front of them. And you can participate in the upcoming public hearing on July 26th. It will be at 7 o'clock at the Civic Hall, which is right next to City Hall. And you can participate in person or you can participate via Zoom. If you have questions about the plans, I encourage people to seek out the information. There's a lot of misinformation floating around in the community right now. So what the City Council can do, they can adopt the plan as recommended by the Planning Commission and Project Advisory Committee. They can amend the plan and then adopt it, and they can choose to do nothing. That's really their choice. And if you want to provide written testimony for the public hearing, but don't want to go to the public hearing, you can send that to me in advance. We do send that out to City Council. They get that in advance of the meeting, or you can testify in person. I like to always share with people last thoughts, and that is sometimes it's hard when we're going through these planning processes for people that get beyond our existing conditions and think about that this is a 20-year plan. And we're really planning for 45,000 people in the future. And then also, there are many different households that make up McMinnville. So what works for my household, I'm a single mom with 3 teenagers, may not necessarily be what works for another household, which is a retired couple or something like that. And so we have to think about all those households in terms of when we're talking about future needs. And put that mindset on. That's what City Council needs to do. So when communicating with them, that's their lens that they're looking at. Communicate with them, understanding that lens as you communicate your thoughts. And that is the end of the long presentation. I apologize, but I want to be available for your questions. I'm happy to stay as long as you need me to stay. And to ask questions, you can just raise your hand if you understand how to do that in Zoom, or you can unmute yourself and ask a question.
I have a question.
Sure.
So that meeting on next Tuesday, the 26th, we can offer community statements. I understand it.
Yeah. So we call it in our little world public testimony.
Public testimony, that's the word.
Yeah, that's so formal. So yeah. What happens is you we call on people individually, so it is organized, but you can get up there and share your thoughts. And the mayor has already said that she is going to allow 5 minutes for people to share their thoughts. Usually it's 3, but she's expanding it to 5 because what we want to do is get more people involved in the process and the discussion than typically participate in our public hearings. So there's a lot of people who are always there and they know how to share their thoughts in 3 minutes. But for most people, it's scary. It's a new thing, and we don't want the time frame to make them feel like they can't actually get what they need to say out. So 5 minutes, and you can either participate in person or you can do it over Zoom.
Okay. Aside from that meeting, are there other places where are there other venues where we might make our preferences about what happens with this area known? I
think now at this point, because we've done all the
research
and surveys and stuff like that, right now it's really the person you're talking to is the city council members. So the other way you can do it is you can write an email and send it to me or the city recorder, and we get that out to all city councilors. And they're reading those, by the way. So for people who aren't comfortable going to a public hearing, that's a great way to communicate. Or you can call your city councilor or any city councilor that you know and talk to them. They can, because this is what we call a community vision, they can talk to people independently, one-on-one. Normally they can't do that with land use decisions, but they can with this one.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and I can tell you they all want to hear from people in the community.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have a question. Who owns the property that's to the south of 18 that's listed there for the commercial development?
There's 3 different properties involved in that. So there's 3 different property owner groups. One is owned by B. Stubblefield, who owns In Springs Living, which is one of those local businesses that expanded and relocated out there. Another property is owned by a group of farmers who are all local farmers. And then the third property is owned by Alan Roothouse, who is a local developer, and Kimco, who is a national developer.
Ah, okay. And would they be the ones that would decide or propose what buildings or what stores could go into that area?
Yes. So that's a great question. Thank you for asking that, because I often get, and especially now in this process, I've gotten a lot of phone calls. Well, if I can vote, I'd like to vote for, some guy told me last night, I'd like to vote for Fred Meyer, Home Depot, and Target. And he had planned it all out. And I was like, okay, but the city doesn't do that part of the world. That's done by the property owner. They're the ones who, get their tenants. So.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Did I hear you say that Costco was maybe trying to get in McMinnville?
Yeah, there's a lot of rumors about that. I can share with you, Costco has met with me. They have interest in McMinnville. They don't have a location. And from what I know about the property owners in this area, I don't know if they're in discussions with Costco or not. I can just tell you, there's a lot of people who say Costco's not interested or Costco is interested. They have visited with me as a planning director. So the question Candace had, just to elaborate a little bit further, the other thing, what the city does is we do the regulation. So we say whether or not that land use is allowed on property. So that's that zoning and comp plan map designation that I was talking about. So which will say only industrial is allowed, or only commercial is allowed, or only residential. Or a combination thereof. And the other thing we do is we sort of create, I always say, the sandbox in which developers are building. So we create all the rules, right, in terms of what something should look like and how the site will be developed in terms of parking and landscaping and things like that. That's what we do as a city. Any other questions? John, you have a question?
Okay. My question is about green space, and maybe it's too late. It sounds like it is actually, but I would think that everything that followed the Yam Hill River should be green space for people to walk or bike or to kayak or whatever. And that doesn't seem to be there at all. It's just Joe Dancer and Airport Park, which is sort of pithy. Airport Park.
So it is intended, maybe you don't see it very well in the map, and our city limits doesn't touch all the river. So a lot of portions between Joe Dancer and Airport Park don't actually go all the way to the river. But one of the value systems design principles that's in the plan is if for land adjacent to the river to have that greenway project there, and have a trail system, much like you just described. And so there is intention for, I don't know how well you can see in the map, but there is sort of this green trail that's supposed to go along the boundary.
Is that very much, or is that very narrow?
Well, we haven't, so that hasn't been figured out. This is all so high level that we're really just putting magic markers on a page, and we haven't actually figured out scale for any of it. But the intention behind this, and the reason why we did this now is because we're updating all of our plans, is that based on how this moves forward and what the community's final decision is, that will then help inform the parks planning process. And then they'll start looking at sort of the more details that you're talking about, Joan.
Okay, thank you.
And the trail system, because the commercial sites become so controversial, we've lost sight of all this other stuff. But the trail system in this plan it's actually pretty interesting. It builds off of existing trails that are out there. It recommends a bridge across the Yamhill River into Joe Dancer Park so that people can ride their bikes or walk to Joe Dancer Park and then get to downtown that way rather than going on the bridge. All right. Two things I would ask of you. We're striving to figure out how to reach out to as many people in McMinnville as possible. The mailing was a sort of test pilot project, and understanding it was too small. But if that was something that you thought was good and you liked to get it and would like to receive more, let me know that. And if you had other ideas on how to get people to participate in the discussions, I'd love to hear that too. We're trying to get as many people involved as possible.
I think
sorry. Go ahead. I'm Lynn, and I was just wondering, what was the plan to power all this stuff? Is there anything about solar power or anything like that in the plan?
Well, so there are design principles in the plan that recommend developers use sustainable practices, but there's no recommendation to require that. And McMinnville has not taken a stance to require that anywhere in the city right now in terms of those sustainable practices. So basically the intention is the power is still the utility power. However, with those we did talk about for the design principles to build off those long sloping roofs that the Evergreen campus has, the museums that are meant to look like a hangar. And those would be great for solar panels. Any other questions? No? Okay, well, thank you so much for participating. And if you need city council contact information, we can provide that too, or the city recorder can provide that. And I encourage you guys to get involved in the discussion.